Okay, let's start letting people in.
I will
And
admit all.
yeah, I made all.
All right. All right. Here comes Daryl.
Darrell, gonna want your participation today.
Oh, yes.
Gonna give it a minute.
Moira, Myra. God, I'm horrible with names.
Mora.
Mora.
Okay, folks. Good morning. It's Sunday, August 17th, 2025. We'd like to thank you for stepping into Cafe Americana this morning. Today's topics are one topic. It's Trump and Putin and the Big Bad Beautiful Summit, or better known as the Nothing Burger. But I'm going to start by talking about this. I knee-jerk reaction. I did say all last week on the 2A, in my chats and stuff, that this was going to be a nothing burger, and it was in many ways. I don't know, I always think about the politics of this stuff. So, in terms of the Trump's younger supporters, the 45-year-olds and under, I think this is something that they're fine with. And that's why we'll bring Daryl in soon. To get done talking about this, he can let us know what he thinks. And of course, the left is going to kill him, and which is fine. And you know, it looks to me the strategy, which by the way, everybody who knows me, I'm totally opposed to. I mean, I'm a hawk and I'm an anti-Putin guy. I know he's a bad guy. Nobody could ever convince me anything different. So for um, for Trump to take this guy in like this, and let him have his dialogue about the Russian history, to me is just a joke. The causes of the war, uh, totally not on how I see things. And I feel bad for Ukraine. But it looks like Trump's strategy. And listen, if you're looking at it from a Trump point of view, this is probably a good thing for him. He's basically dumping this into the Europeans' lap along with Zelensky. And at least he is getting things moving. We could say it's a nothing burger, but at least he met with the guy. I don't like a meeting with a dictator and murderer and kind of giving him the stage and letting him, say we're wonderful friends. And look, I invaded Ukraine because of all of these problems, which is bullshit. But at least we got the ball moving. And now tomorrow you have Zelensky and NATO leaders, European leaders coming in to talk with Trump. And in the big picture, and this is, I don't want to speak for Daryl, but I'm definitely interested to hear what he has to say. In the big picture, this has nothing to do with us, right? In the big picture, like in terms of our military and stuff, right? If we want to do America first, we could walk away from this. It doesn't really have a bearing on us. And unless we're talking about deals and minerals and energy, so it'll be an interesting thing to see how this goes tomorrow. And in fairness to Trump, he did say this first meeting will not, it'll be the second meeting that's the important meeting. So it's not like he lied to the American people and said, I'm walking out with a deal. He didn't say that. But it's still not good for older conservatives. It's not a good look to be standing up there with Vladimir Putin and not even call he's going Vladimir, my friend. It's really a disgrace. But I know Trump is transactional. He looks for business meetings. He's looking for deals with Russia. He over exaggerates, in my opinion, their importance, their wealth in the world, their military strength, but he gives them deference, and this is why we're at the point we're at now. And I will pass it over to my good friend, co-host ML Shaw.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kenny. Yeah, I was gonna say, we really don't know what's gonna happen until we hear those first, sort of hear those first headlines for like when the content of the summit was transmitted to Zelensky and then to the EU, et cetera. But I do think that it is very interesting that we're going from a ceasefire all the way to a peace deal. So, in other words, what you're seeing is, and as far as like it goes, like I kind of I'm of two minds. I agree. I don't really like platforming uh, leaders who are just ruthless killers every bit as much as whatever. But when has Trump ever really cared about diplomatic niceties? Which I would also add that those would include what would have been considered insults from one side to him, which he just ignores. Now he'll bite down on other things, but I do think it's interesting that ceasefire. It's like we're not messing around anymore. I think is what we're doing. I think what we're seeing happen, and this has some connective tissue in my theory of the case with Gaza and Israel, which is we can get into, or maybe not, whatever it is, but whatever. But what I think we're seeing is we're seeing the options be burned down to the absolute bare minimum of what has to happen. Ted Cruz reiterated. He also was interviewed during the roll up on Friday, which I caught a lot of coverage on the network news cycle for it, and he was basically saying the Senate and the House, well, not necessarily the House, but they would presumably come along for secondary sanctions. The Senate is all in the tank for that. That's waiting in the wings for Trump to lean on. And that bill has been specifically tailored to Trump and his characteristics for freedom of movement for what his options are, basically. But anyway, going back, Ted Cruz said, "We're not going to give any more. The money train is over as far as it goes. But however, comma, we're doing it in this alternative way of like where we'll sell EU that stock and then the EU will turn around and sell it to Ukraine. That way, on the political front, Trump can say, we're not giving billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine like during the Biden era. But I think we're seeing that. I don't know. I don't know. At the end of the day, Russia still has a vote, a direct say, a veto on the battlefield. Um, I don't think any territory is going to get swapped. I don't think any. I would be really surprised because we all have seen Ukraine and they're locked in on their side, but so is Russia. They're just as locked in on their side. So I don't necessarily think we're going to see peace, but I think that what you're going to see is I don't think things are going to change too much on the front lines per se for ceasefire or a peace deal or whatever. But I do think if Russia doesn't come along or whatever, I do think that it will come to the point to where you'll start to see the secondary sanction. You're going to see the knock on the secondary effects of like what else America can do. We're already putting our economic relationship with India in jeopardy. We're also doing the same thing with China potentially, assuming we don't have a taco situation and things go. But who knows? We don't. Nobody knows until we know. But I think this is in a reverse way, you can kind of read between the lines because Trump said very publicly, "I'll walk away. If I walk away from the thing, if I don't think this guy's playing, what I perceive as being fair ball or being serious about any of this, I'll walk away." He didn't do that, obviously. Now, my understanding is the summit didn't go as long as it could have. So there's that too. But then you also had the press conference that was out there, and you can read the tea leaves all you want, I guess. But Putin spoke longer than Trump did. Trump had the last word to clean up whatever there wasn't much to clean up, although um, Putin kind of pardon my language, he took a shit on stage and he said, "Well, maybe you can come over to Moscow next time." And I think Trump handled that pretty deftly. But I don't know. I don't quite know. I don't see why the part I don't understand, and this is what nobody but the most gifted Trump whisper, like Mark Halperin, can convey or whatever, which is why if we're not going to get past block one, which is the whole Ukraine Russia thing, then why are we talking about economics with Russia? Because my understanding is the economics part with their economic people and our economic people went very well as far as a conversation goes. That doesn't mean anything's going to happen from it, but you're running in two different directions. Like where you have, we can talk about economics and opening up and not doing sanctions and making it a little bit sweetening the pot for Russia, da 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 da. Whether they'll come along, they're obviously maybe interested, but how are we going to get past that, that point, so I don't know. I'm really curious to hear Aaron, because we kind of held back a little bit in our pre-show conversation. So I'm very curious, but that's what I say. A little bit long-winded, sorry.
Go ahead, Aaron. Nope, I can't hear you, buddy. Get your sound going.
He's coming online. Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Just
That's all right.
airbud issues there. Um, so I will disagree, Jimmy, with you with what you said earlier about the fact that we really don't have a dog in this race. So if if everyone agrees, which they don't, but if they do, that China and Russia are our peer and pace threats around the world that we face in the 21st century as the primary ones, um, then any major intensive conflict that either one is in that we can proxy their conventional destruction, which will weaken them relative to us, is a unique and historic opportunity. And if China
Which
would,
we never take.
well, this time we are. And so the point is that what we are doing is the Ukrainian will to fight is, very deep. Is it unlimited? No, we don't know what anyone's will to fight is until they're in a fight for 10 or 11, 12 years like they are in. But I would say it's pretty deep after 11 years. And their capacity for innovation is, I would say, sort of revolutionary, which we gain the benefits of. And more importantly, the scale of the destruction of a peer um, of a peer threat is really sort of unmatched since I would argue um, at least the Korean War. So you get an opportunity every, in this case, if you do the math, 75 years for one of your main threats to basically get ground down by some large percentage, 50% at least, I would say is a fair number when it comes to their conventional war making capability. And I would say it's on its path to 75%, which you're just not going to reconstitute in any practical way in the modern world. I mean, no one's building strategic bombers anymore. I mean, we aren't even, I mean, barely the B-21s, but that's going to take 50 years to replace our inventory, and the Russians aren't building any. So as the Ukrainians can knock out the strategic triad of Russia, and all of the people were jumping around saying nuclear war, nuclear war, nuclear war. Well, the Ukrainians knocked one third of the strategic triad out, and all Russia did was launch more missiles and attack more civilians, which is what I said they would do, because they view the version of the Ukrainian strategic bombers as civilians in cities, and because the Ukrainians don't have strategic bombers. So in the end, um, anything that takes us off the path of the destruction of the support of the destruction of Russian forces is ultimately a missed opportunity. So my perspective is that the nothing burger that you described um, is in our strategic interest, as long as the Russians keep sort of fighting in this very, very long path, right? Which basically has been gaining 9% of Ukraine for an average of 150,000 casualties for each percent. And I think the Ukrainians are, and that's getting harder and harder for them to generate that percent. So and I think if the Ukrainians, if you ask the Ukrainians, would you trade 1% more of Ukraine for 250,000 Russian casualties? I think they'll take that deal. And at this point, the Russians don't seem to be willing to trade any other way. So to me, that's the calculus, right? That's the real world calculus. And I think if we do anything to diminish that, we're only losing the opportunity that you get roughly every 30 to 100 years of one of your major threats
But Trump's not going there.
well, but the Ukrainians are, and the Europeans are, and that's sort of what counts because the thing we don't recognize is the Ukrainians and the Europeans are providing now around 80% of the ordnance that they need. And so the only thing the US provides or sells now to the Europeans is really the advanced precision ordnance, and that over the next year is going to probably whittle down to about 10 of that 20%. So that's and outside of that, it's all intelligence. And I think most agree that the Ukrainians are that the US is not going to stop sharing intelligence. That's the real red line.
Yeah, you have to. Now
So
let me
you have
inter
to,
yep.
the
Listen.
whole stack of arguments collapse.
Yes.
And everybody's been talking around in a circle because if you aren't willing to change, because if you were on the Russian side right now and said, you have one thing to ask the US to stop, which tells me how unstrategic they are too, you would say intelligence sharing
Yeah.
because everything else you can replace,
Yeah,
but
you
you
can't
can't
do that.
replace the US intelligence umbrella because and it tells me the Russians really don't, in some ways, understand their gaps. I mean, I'm sure someone does that has been replaced 5 times and it doesn't have an audience. But I mean, the Russians are unwilling to understand even what's wrong in their order of battle and their strategy. Because as long as the U.S. is sharing intelligence, which is giving the Europeans a chance to build their ordnance capacity and really giving the Ukrainians an opportunity to hone the ordnance capacity and build theirs and start to replace some of that intelligence sharing. This window, as long as this window exists, then the Ukrainians really have a fight as long as they want the fight, which from the beginning I said was going to be, or once we got past the first 3 to 9 months, basically I said this thing was going to be 5 to 10 years in this era of the fight.
Okay. Right. So let me bring in Andres is here, so I want to bring him in. Andres, just talk about everything you want to talk about with this summit and what do you think's going to happen going forward. I said earlier, I think basically Trump is dumping this into Europeans' lap and Zelensky's lap.
That's one way to look at it. This was a number one talking point for me. This was a Putin press event on American territory. I've said that several times. This was not a Trump event. There are many people here who support President Trump, and I think you guys all know the difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0. If anything, this was a Trump 1.0 event.
Yeah.
Quiet. Not the fact that he wasn't insulting Putin. That's one thing, but he wasn't controlling anything. And there's 2 points to that. One, he wasn't controlling when he was out in public. Obviously, the press conference smartly doesn't take questions because Helsinki burned him on those kind of questions. Sure, that's fine for a leader not to do, but he ceded control of the narrative to Putin. And there's one big way this happens, and this was discussed during the first President Trump administration, is that when you have a war with your press corps, which is what President Trump had in the first one and second one, there's a difference when you have to act as a united country against an enemy, and this is an enemy state. There were several hundred people who came over with Putin on this trip. They got several hundred visas for journalists, for assistants to come here. And, for the journalist part, they are propagandists, and they were the only ones getting any information from what was happening inside the room. None of the press corps was getting any, none of the U.S. press corps, because they fight with Trump. Even Mike Carter, a great guy on Newsmax that I work with, was not getting direct information. They were all getting their information from the Russian journalists who were there to feed information. So Trump's team made a mistake where they weren't able to craft the narrative.
Yeah.
They weren't controlling anything. And so Putin was able to roll him in terms of the narrative of what comes out of this. That at the end, even though he has a sit down with Brett Baer, President Trump, right before, and says, if I leave without a ceasefire, I'm not going to be happy. That's not success in his mind. He leaves without a ceasefire, and he proposes a deal, which was Putin's plan. Putin's plan was no ceasefire. Let's do a grand bargain. So I think in the end, it was good for the Trump team altogether to understand that they're not going to agree to anything there. We'll go back. We'll talk with people. And this is a different Ukraine team than in 2015 when we had the Normandy format and the Minsk agreement, that everybody was like, oh, this is peace, and we're gonna see what happens after this. The U.S. State Department had grants up the wazoo about, these are the same kind of grants they do for African countries post-conflict. We're going to revive things. You can work across the border of different occupied zones and stuff. None of that came to be because it wasn't a real peace back then. And same thing here. It's wise to pause on what's happening. And what Ukraine is doing is not doing the same thing it did in 2015, which is rely on Europe to do the right thing or other countries to do the right thing. Ukraine is actively, Zelensky was in Europe, and that's why he's flying together with the head of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. He's flying together with the president of Finland. Giorgia Meloni from Italy canceled her vacation, and she's flying to the White House. So this is not a gang up on Trump, but this is Ukraine is not alone. If we're going forward with some kind of ceasefire and deal and some kind of security guarantees, it's going to have to be, like Trump said, the Europeans. So Zelensky is bringing the Europeans over with them, say, listen, we want to talk about this. Let's talk about this right now. What are these guarantees? But overall, people can talk about the bad things, the good things. Frankly, when I was on a lot of Republican spaces over the weekend, the only two good things people talked about was like, hey, didn't you like that B-2 flyover? Or the fact that President Trump had a longer red carpet than Putin. And those are two things that happened in the first 5 minutes.
MAGA, the MAGA world, to echo that, MAGA world was in love with the flyover, and they were in love with the optics of that, to piggyback on that.
To be fair.
The response of which was a shrug from Putin, but the White House was so enamored with it, they gave exclusive access to the New York Times beforehand to do a whole splash page about this. They thought it was going to be a bigger deal.
Yeah, I wanted to, I'm really curious, Professor Kinney, if I could, with Andre. Andre, do you think that because one of the things that did come from this was Trump seemed to had softened on the security guarantee position, like where originally the U.S. said, we're not doing nothing. And the UK and France kept working on the sidelines to be like, let's get troops. We're ready to go. We'll be the peacekeeping force. So that is unique. And I can't help but wonder if we kind of know like what will happen. I think in a way, if you game it out, the front line, I don't think much is going to be done as far as like the battle lines. It's going to be the same as it always is. But then you also have the threat, I think, that Trump is trying to tell Russia that, oh, by the way, not only are the economic sanctions coming if you guys screw around and pussyfoot around and not be serious with this, which we know that they don't have to be. Russia is right where it wants to be, essentially, if we take everything at face value. The summit means nothing ultimately, is what I'm saying. But like you have the economic effects. So I can't help but wonder if the United States, if Trump is positioning ourselves because he kind of knows this is going to be a train wreck of a thing and like nothing is really going to change. So in 2 or 3 weeks or whatever we go from here, I can't help but wonder if, oh, by the way, Russia, not only are we going to hit you on the backside with the economic front and we don't give a shit if we disturb our economic interests with India and China. And then you also have the CIS states, I keep going back to that a lot, but I can't help but wonder if like, okay, well, I'll tell you what, Russia, in a year or two or whatever it is, I'm just making this up, or months from now, when you're exhausted and you really don't have any more reserves to go from, or you expend yourself against the wall that is Ukraine, Hopefully, Ukraine can. I don't think that we're going to take away intelligence, and I don't think that we're going to pause weapon shipments like we did before. I don't think that's in the cards, but and we won't know until it happens anyway. But I can't help but wonder if Trump is trying to tell, listen, America, this is between if he shifts it over, if he shifts the frontline stuff over to the EU, and then lets them deal with it, whatever, and then essentially we say we'll come in as the third string, as the reserve, which we can come through and do that. I can't help but wonder if that's part of the calculus because Armenia and Azerbaijan and even Kazakhstan, even some of the more stable states like with Russia, those are disintegrating before our eyes, and they already have been anyway. But sorry, it
So
was handed back to you.
what's happening in Ukraine obviously is everybody talks about, or not everybody, but people say, well, if it can happen in Ukraine, look, the Western guarantees don't mean anything, so China can invade Taiwan. In a similar way, what happened in Ukraine is that Russia got its ass whooped. It could not take over Ukraine when it thought, and that is the reason that ML is bringing up those Central Asian states, because a lot of their keeping in line is that Russia can whoop our ass. Maybe not. So there's after effects on both sides here. So there's after effects of the West not standing up for Ukraine, maybe Taiwan and other places, or other countries might want to take over territory. There's no global police cop anymore, so who knows? But then there's also the after effects of China being its own cop around its own borders and dominating those governments, and they might see what Ukraine did and be like, hey, let's just get a couple of hundred or 1,000 drones and see what happens. So there's after effects here. I think that this is a shit show that Trump is trying to manage a crappy plane landing. I think that's one of the reasons that JD Vance doesn't want to be a part of this. I think his political team, he has his outlook on Ukraine. We know that. But I also think that if he wants to run for president, he doesn't want this stink to be on him in 2028. So it's interesting that he kept being on vacation, was involved a little bit while he was on vacation in the UK, but he's not a part of this. I thought it was very interesting that Scott Bessent was involved, was brought to Alaska, as well as a whole bunch of people that, along with Scott Bessent, wasn't in the room. That was a failure on us to not get to that next step when they're talking about. And Scott Bessent, I think, is still going to be a very influential person in this administration. He's the one that negotiated the minerals deal. The person he negotiated with just got elevated to be the prime minister of Ukraine, and he's working with her to sign a new deal where America gets Ukraine's technological innovations on drones, and America will get the business back end of that. So I think it's going to be interesting in terms of when we're talking about Russia's economy dying. Even Russia's central bank is saying that they're going to be at negative GDP by the end of the year. So their inflation's at 20% and rising. What kind of business can you do with Russia? Are we going to import their oil and cabbage soup? I don't know, but there's really no native business to talk about.
You don't like borscht? You don't like borscht?
I honestly don't know what kind of business relations you can do. Their entire economy has changed over to be a military based economy. So, their military supplies is what's keeping people employed. So that's another reason for them to not stop the war. President Putin is not going to meet with President Zelensky. I was pretty confident he wouldn't fly over to the United States. I didn't realize we were going to literally have a red carpet with American soldiers on our knees. But hey, nobody in Ukraine believes that President Putin will meet with Zelensky, and we'll see what happens. But this is why it's good to get other people at the table, not just the Trump, Putin, Zelensky thing, but get the European leaders. Because the one thing Putin does want, less so than business with the United States, he wants business again with Europe. And that's really, if you want a Trump card, that's really the card you want to bring to the table.
Yeah. Aaron.
Yeah, so I think something that's lost in this conflict, because it's gotten so sort of tactical, and every week there's a micro change in something on the battlefield, is that, I mean, by my calculations, there's like 10 major strategic dimensions that are never on the table, because basically all the actors have agreed that this is, by sort of international relations theory, a limited war. It's not limited for the people in the fight. There's no such thing when you're in the fight. It's a total war. But in context, right? They've limited this conflict to basically, we'll call it the greater supported Russia, which is any target in Russia that Ukraine can get that supports the war, and all of Ukraine from a Russian perspective, and really nowhere else, right? They can't, and no one's hitting targets, outside of that dimension. And the reason I bring this up is that that limited war context means all the strategic levers are off the table. So I've counted 10 of these, which is European troops, Russian war against the cities, which would be a total war, basically the Groznification of Ukraine, basically grinding 50 to 100 Russian Ukrainian cities to dust. The intel sharing by the U.S., full secondary sanctions by the U.S. on Russia and enforcing them. Um, Direct precision strike support by the U.S. So we might share the intelligence, but we're not saying, these targets are here at that time, use this weapon system, push button G, go, right? We're not giving that kind of precision targeting. Russian hitting NATO supply lines and what I would call the sort of weak front. Russia threatening or teasing into a Baltic invasion, and vertical escalation by Russia in terms of nuclear. So those 10 dimensions, and then the last one, I'm sorry, is the what I call the Ukrainian break glass and the Syrianification of the war, which is to go Hobbesian on Russia and all Russians, right? Basically go animal mode. So those 10 dimensions are off the table, which means all that leverage is off the table. So we're negotiating. So all the parties are negotiating over a bunch of, what I would sort of say is weak deal points, because those 10 major dimensions are really the key levers of this conflict. And the key to this that I mentioned, it's pretty obvious, is they're all between moderately and massively escalatory.
Yeah.
So there's been basically an escalatory cap that's been put on this thing. And nobody talks about it. It's not in any really very many conversations. If it is, it's behind, the pantry closet or whatever. And so, so what we're doing is we're sort of having these conversations in this context of this much more limited, smaller war. Not small because it's small to the people involved, but small in terms of how it could escalate or grow and how destabilizing it actually can be. And the reason that's very important is because of that. That means the actors involved are unable to create leverage on each other. And we understand why, because there's a great book called Guns of August, which was written about World War One, which is basically the miscalculation by all the parties that can go on. And so a big part of modern international relations is basically a continuous non-repeat of World War One. And so, and because of that, I just don't think anything changes because there's no leverage here, right?
Right. Let me jump in. So
Can,
let me
can you
go
point
ahead.
out, Kenny, though, the one big leverage that we're not using is Trump 2.0. Like,
Yes.
so Aaron is talking about we're not escalating at all. Trump 2.0 is all about escalation. So
Yes.
if you can bring that up in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And my question was going to be if, see, a lot of this deals with Trump's personality too. He was 2.0. He's been told you're getting bitch slapped by this guy. And he even said in press conferences, I think this guy's tapping me. This guy's tapping me. So he got pissed. Right. And then, now he's like, he changed his stance on weaponry. Of course, he played the political game where we sell it to the EU and then they sell it to Ukraine, which is just to satisfy the Darrells of the world. But that's just the strategy that
That's just stringing out the Darrells.
yes, exactly, 100%.
And
the
Darrells
thing is,
know this because they've been strung out by their parents, by
right.
all
But here's my
Ubers,
question.
by
I got a
everyone all
question
the
now
time.
for Andres, maybe for all three of you guys and our audience here. Do they come out of this thing tomorrow where they decide, because I don't see Zelensky. Trump's back to that 1.0 where he's like, just make the deal, just make the
Yep.
deal, right?
Yep.
And I don't, it's very easy for him to say, right? And I don't see Zelensky going, okay, we'll make the deal, we'll give up all of this land, and we'll just walk away. I mean, if he does, he's got to have a million guarantees,
No,
right?
no, no. It's impossible because if you give up Donbass, it's a straight
Right.
line to Odessa.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. But
And
here's the thing.
now you're going to get escalation.
All right,
Because
but
if that happens, then
this is
Ukraine
getting
has
to
to
the
take it
point
back.
you brought up before, Aaron. Do they walk out of this meeting tomorrow where they just say, let's just keep arming Ukraine and let them fight Russia until Russia's economy can't handle it anymore?
Yep, that's right.
Is that the going to be the strategy? What do you think, Andre?
There are a lot more. There are a lot more tools that are available. Trump had and I shared this with Aaron this week. Trump had a guy in the State Department in the first administration that dealt with sanctions, and he's like, bump, 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 bump. 9 things that you could do that Trump can flip a switch and would drive Russia crazy. Just they can get around it in 2 or 3 months, but it just mixes up their bank accounts, mixes up everything. Fuck, we got to do this all over again. Okay, but it's about being Trump 2.0. It's about if we're comfortable with this is not the same thing, but if we're comfortable with ramping up tariffs against Canada double, triple within the drop of a hat, if we're comfortable with it, we did it at some point against China. We had like 150% tariffs announced. This is what we're not utilizing. We're not utilizing Trump's skill, which is radical escalation that may mean nothing, but he has that ability that everybody's at the table and he's like, I'm just going to do this right now. How about that? And what actually happened on the flip side is that they were in a room together, and instead of Trump being that guy, Putin launches attacks on Ukraine while Trump is sitting down in the room. That's a Trump move. That's not a yeah.
I want to say, and then I wanted to cede my time to Daryl real quick because I'm really curious.
Yeah,
to
we're
hear
gonna start calling everybody in.
Yeah, real quick, I wanted to say, you also see Russia on the world stage. You're seeing a weakened global Russia. You have the Wagner states. I don't know if anybody's paying attention or not, but in Africa, all the Wagner things are gone.
Yeah.
And there's a few Central African states which are really reliant on that military service, and they can't pay the bill anymore. And Wagner's no more. So they're begging Russia to come through the door, and Russia's like, you don't have anything for us, nor can they even extend themselves out that far or that long. They can't even do bombing strikes. They can't do long range nothing. That this stuff, Russia goes forward at its peril as far as it goes. Like there's always going to be a Russia with nukes, okay? But you're going to see if they don't play this right and they don't weave. I'm sure they can get by sanctions, but I really wonder if we're going to see for the first time in probably ever a Trump 2.0 united front with Zelensky, with the EU, and say, Zelensky, listen, we know you're going to take it on the chin. Just work with us. We're bringing the economic levers are slowly coming into, and to be fair, front facing, I think Trump is, contrary to his persona of being bombastic and just dropping the hammer, whatever. I think we're seeing more restrained Trump to like where, because once you start messing with those economic levers like that, with especially when you talk about India and China and all these other things that I was talking about, surrounding Russia, like it. I mean, the clock starts ticking. But anyway, I'll cede my time to Daryl. Very curious.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll just say one last thing before Daryl comes in. I would like to believe that this is actually a strategy on Trump's part where he allows the kissing of Putin's ass just so that he has his coverage now when he has to go back to being Trump 2.0. But we'll see. I'm going to ask Daryl to come in because I'm sure he's got a lot of things to say about this. Go ahead, Daryl.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys have enjoyed your last 35 minutes of your collective boomer wet dream. Yeah, I have some agreement, with you, Kenny, how you started, which is, I think I think Trump is just done with this whole thing.
Yeah.
I think he's like, fuck this. Why are we doing this? You know, Trump is not Henry Kissinger, Aaron. He doesn't want, he's not thinking about this like long term civilization strategy, how we're going to defeat our enemies, except in one way, which is against China. And I think what we might be seeing here is some Henry Kissinger type thinking against our real enemy, which is China, not Russia. And I'm very I'm very interested in the fact that Putin brought all those business leaders. I think what Trump and Putin, they're just waiting for day one after this thing's all over, because they want to go. We want to go up to the Arctic and split up the Arctic with Russia. You know, there's a lot of collaboration we can do. We can get all the natural resources that we've tariffed from China. We can basically get all those from Russia. I think Trump's trying to figure out a way to get the fuck out of this thing. And I think, you know, his strategy of pushing it on the Europeans, he's going to pull another, like, you know, Zelensky cabinet meeting, because he's going to say, all right, I've met with Putin. I've done the best I can. Here's the deal. You guys need to accept the deal. And Zelensky's not going to accept the deal. They're going to say, no, we got to keep going. And Trump's eventually going to say, you know what? Fuck this. I'm out of here. And we're just going to go do our own thing. I think that day is coming. Just look at the language. Like, Putin was saying, oh, yeah, this thing would have never happened if the election hadn't been stolen. And then that launched Trump into like a whole tirade. He's like, yeah, I was stolen, and Putin's right. Like, these two guys, they're in total agreement about what they want to do, about the future, about reality. And the circumstances are preventing both of them from getting on to doing what they want to do. You know, as far as the battlefront, you know, there have been some interesting gains made by Russia recently. Now, Ukraine just counterattacked in the last like 24 hours and did some successful counterattacks. But, you know, it's still a manpower issue. And, you know, from a strategic point of view, I'm almost curious if Russia would really want to stop until they cut off access to the Black Sea, you know, to reach Odessa. I wonder if that's their final goal, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, that's my main point. I don't think they're not thinking like, oh, we're going to destroy Russia and kill all the Russians and take out a peer competitor. I mean, the peer competitor is China. And I think the Trump administration understands that. And we should use the Kissinger strategy of separating Russia from China. If we want to really destroy Russia, all that's going to do is push them together with China. They'll survive as some quasi-vassal state. But is that really what we want?
Yeah.
All right, you guys can tell me how I'm wrong.
No. That very good. I'm glad you helped. Go ahead, Andres. Tell him how wrong he is.
Okay, so economically, we have no business with Russia. There's nothing to do with Russia. They're pulling out of space station, was probably the only real thing that we coordinated with them. We still have a contract with Russia that was signed during the war. I think December 2023, Biden signed a prolonging of the space cooperation agreement for all those people who say that Biden didn't talk to Russia. So we're actively in business for space, but beyond that, there's really nothing. As economies, we're actually more wedded, obviously, with China for the economy. I'm not saying I want to be with China. I'm just saying that's the reality of the case. The best counter to that is what you know. I was a big proponent of the TPP, but Trump is also, you know, doing his own thing about making sure that companies get out of Russia. It doesn't get out of China, but it's not about bringing them here. We need to move them to Cambodia and Laos, and just, you know, we want cheap stuff. We just need to move it out of China to limit their economic power, which becomes military power for them. But in terms of you know, China has made it very clear this summer, their foreign minister, their people, they are aligned with Russia. They are supplying 80% of the parts for Russia's drones. They do not want Russia to lose. They have said it publicly. So they are on Team Russia no matter what. And I don't know. I don't know what strategy there is for this theoretical splitting Russia and China. They, they have an economic alliance. They have military training that they do together. They are both wedded deeply with the future of North Korea. There, in my mind, I just don't see what this Kissinger strategy is. It was a different thing when we're talking about Maoist China and the USSR. This is a different beast, and we'll see what happens. I would just I'll just add one more thing. When we're talking about what's happening in Ukraine, it's been more than one day that Ukraine has, as I said, what Russia has been doing is tapping the front line. They're not using mechanized vehicles. They're not using anything very well coordinated. They're actually kind of doing this. Goes back and forth for 10 years. What Ukraine has been doing from time to time, which is trying to penetrate and see where things are. That's what Russia's been doing. They've been noticing where there's some porous action, and they've gone too far. And so we have all of these salients, all of these entry points into Ukraine, and Ukraine has been a very aggressive moil in the last 48 days, and we're just clipping all of these salients. This is going to be the problem for any peace negotiation, because if you guys were interested in what happened in the first time in 2015 and the Minsk agreements, the Europeans put pressure on Ukraine to say, take this deal, and they did what is being proposed by Putin now, which is give territory that technically Russia didn't control.
Yeah.
And so for one location, Debaltseve, it was a city that had a couple of hundred Ukrainian soldiers. Ukrainian soldiers were there. The front line moved overnight with a peace deal. Ukrainian commanders told all their guys, leave your weapons, leave your tanks, leave everything, and you're going to walk out of there. And the soldiers are smart enough to evacuate in the cover of night instead of in the morning. But even in the cover of night, they walked down 20 meters down the road, and it was just sniper fire. The Russians were just rifling these guys down. This is what a handover of territory to Russia is going to be, and Ukraine knows that. And that's why when we're talking about 1,000 miles of front line, this is why you don't make a deal overnight. You're talking about all of these nooks and crannies that you got to talk about where is going to be the dividing line.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Aaron.
That's why there's no deal. There never has been, never will be, because what people don't get is that so the major error the Ukrainians had the last 2.5 years is they did not begin their fortressification of their defensive lines until really about 1.5 years ago at a serious level, which requires, because it's 1,000 miles, basically the equivalent of 2 Ukrainian army engineering armies, which they are almost there on, probably another 6 months in having the personnel, 6 months to 1 year. And then it takes the year, once you have all of them, to build these lines. So once the Ukrainians have the fortifications, which is going to be this belt that is minimum 2-3 miles to 8 to 10 miles deep, the Russians can't penetrate. The Ukrainians, outside of where the Russians have gaps, small gaps in their version of the belt, that's as far as, generally speaking, Ukrainians can penetrate and maintain an advance. And once that happens, then you have a DMZ-ification by design, right? Forget all these peace deals and everyone flying back and forth and buying tchotchkes in New York for their family and stuff. Like that's all, that world is noise. Until the physics on the ground prevent both sides from being able to have a large scale, core level and above thrust to the other side, if they don't care about casualties, right? The Russians could have core to army level strikes against Ukraine. They will take astronomical casualties that their whole political and military system just can't process, right? They will actually destabilize when you're talking about, potentially losing.
Yeah, but they were already doing that.
No, hold on. No, we're talking about doing that in this peace part way.
Yeah.
They're across, 200 engagements to 200 to 600 small engagements a day where they take, 1,000 to 3,000 casualties. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the world looking at 175,000 Russians pouring into Ukraine, 2 million Ukrainians, including people who aren't even in the army, but basically territorial reservist grandpas, just everyone in the gunfight, and basically 75 to 100,000 dead Russians, bleeding out on the Ukrainian plain, all happening in a matter of a few weeks to a month. Russia can't process that politically, right? So Russia's not going to do that, because if they could process it politically, they would do that. They would have
I,
done it already 2 years ago.
I wanted to go back and touch on what Daryl said as far as like the Kissinger thing, if I could, for a moment. You also have China. Xi Jinping in China is not doing so hot. Okay, is he gonna lose power tomorrow? No. But China throughout this whole thing has been very pragmatic. And they need to make money now, today, not tomorrow, not whatever. Of course, they're going to look for their future. But you have China. They're not on the ropes at all. I'm not trying to paint that picture. They're still strong, but you also have a Russia that is very, very close to being maxed out for its capabilities and its maximum capacity for whatever it wants to do. You have the front line. The front line will be used against them. Make if this economic play that I think is going to happen happens. You also have the fact that like it takes more internal resources for Putin to control Russia and maintain order on top of a wet shit bag economy doing something. You can only play paper trails for so long. But there is movement there. You have Kazakhstan in March that said that they were gonna route their gas things without Russia. That's Kazakhstan. That was one of the more ardent members of that was pro Russia or whatever. You have this breaking and fracturing on Russia's back door in their backyard for this. All it takes is for a pragmatic economic interest to say, China, go in and sweep up. Whatever you want to make money from this, obviously they're going to make money from. They're going to do it anyway. But this way, it's a little bit more structured, and it will piece. And I would add too, Russia is not Russia. Russia and China may be strategic allies for now, but you also have the fact of Russia, the FSB has to prevent Chinese spies from stealing the few things that Russia has that are superior to what China has, which is in the aerospace and the nuclear technologies, et cetera, et cetera. They have better tech than China does in those realms in a lot of ways. But I can't help but think I think there's a bigger tapestry here that is going to be cooking, and then we're going to find out real quick. And early next week, we're going to find out how united EU, Zelensky, us, the West, the collective West, call it. This is what Daryl would not argue with me that the collective
I
West.
will say one thing, Mike. Don't sleep on NATO Secretary Rutt, right? He has been, I would
He's been
say,
very good. Been very good.
European Trump whisperer,
Sure.
who seems to figure out, and I put a list of everyone coming over. You have not had a group this large engage on U.S.
Yeah,
soil
yeah,
World War II, right?
yeah.
This is not a trivial thing. And
No.
I will say this, being very objective about it, um, given how completely unplanned and half-baked this whole process is,
Yeah.
and it just is, the idea that we're having literally 10 European principals, NATO principal plus an allied actor meeting with the US president after they met with a antagonist, however you want to label them, all within a 100-hour period, sort of without any kind of protocol agenda process, because these kind of events come from the ground up, from the protocol on up. Like when Andre does all of
Right, but this is
stuff.
rapid fire now. So
Yeah, but understand what that
like you
means.
said, within 100 hours,
I know,
there is
but
no
but but
protocol.
understand what that means. The history of rapid fire principles, kind of, rolling hard, is the same in almost any other environment, right? When the head of a major hospital system jumps right down into the oncology unit, chaos. And the CEO jumps down into an account planning process with a client, chaos. When the prime
Aaron,
minister does the same thing, chaos.
Aaron, let's put it into a short window diplomatic thing instead of real world stuff. This happened at Yalta.
Yep.
Stalin rolled the West at Yalta.
Yep.
And this is why the Polish government right now is speaking the most harshest,
Of
because
course.
they were like, We were at the table. You guys told us we were your allies. We
They
were
were the
part of,
rollee. They were the
they were
rollee.
they were the first victims of the war in 39, and they were the biggest victims of Yalta because Stalin said, sure, no problem. We're going to do a democratic election for Poland. They're your allies. We're going to stand by that. They rigged the election for the communists, and those guys had to run out of that country, or they would have been the guys who didn't leave the country within 24 hours were all put up against assassination lines.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens when you have a quick. So you had good real world examples of what happens in business when you act too fast, but we have a diplomatic example, and that was Yalta, end of World War II. Everything
And the reason
condensed.
you do this bottom up, to be blunt, is for that reason, right? Like the same way we don't like, I mean, we have history to teach us. We don't like doing guns of August things because these things get out of control. We don't like having principles roll hard in gangster mode. That's why we go protocol on up. And I understand Trump is built when you're dealing with, tier 9 states to roll them. But, the truth is almost any principal could roll a tier 9 state. They just don't do it because they don't like looking like the bully bad guy. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying like that's why they don't do it as much. And so, but when you're dealing with this tier 1 world, it just doesn't work because because the problem is that can't the principals think they have the power. They really don't because the power is in the details and they can agree at this high level, kind of voodoo level. But when they get down into the real meat and potatoes underneath it, at the colonels level, at the experts level, they all say, yeah, you can't do this. This doesn't work. Like it's not even the right frame.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing falls apart on them.
All right, let me bring in Raleigh because he had his hand up earlier. Go ahead, Raleigh.
Yeah, I mean, people kind of made most of my points. I mean, I don't have anything more to contribute because everybody covered everything. Yeah, like I mean, everybody covered everything.
Okay. Does anybody else want to jump in? Nobody else wants to raise their hand?
I'm just going to say that we're getting a lot of stuff because the Sunday morning news shows follow Cafe Americana because Cafe Americana is the most important one. But Rubio's already putting stuff out, and Witkoff has had a couple of videos. So everything we're talking about today, we're going to have a lot more to talk about tomorrow.
I will say Mike's comment earlier on JD Vance was really interesting. Because I've had that sort of idea on not on this issue, but on others. And the fact that, he's got a bros and bros golf trip, for, a week and a half is actually really smart, right? Because he, he kind of shot his load when it comes to being able to do good cop or bad cop worst cop, whatever you want to call it, in the first meeting. And there's really nothing else he can provide, right? He's not going to counter the boss. Everyone either sees him as the dog that can chew. He's already proven that, so doing it a second time just sort of what do you call it, dilutes it. So I think it's really intelligent that his people, however, I would not throw it past Usha as the deep strategist in a lot of this. Say, hey, if you're really serious about this, really, you need to kind of exit stage left. And then, because by the way, if something turns into something, he's going to have his stand-in cardboard that he can just replace with himself, take the pictures and say, see, I was right. See, we were right. So it's almost like no risk either way for him. So that I think is a really, and Rubio, I think strangely is almost on the other side of this right now.
Rubio is on the other side
because
of it.
He's got to carry water. He's got to carry water.
Right. He's got to carry water for Trump. And at the same time, he doesn't believe any of this.
That's right. And everyone knows he does it. So it's even worse.
Yeah.
Some of the clips I'm checking out right now is Rubio being very like, no, we didn't agree to this. No, we didn't agree with this. No, we didn't agree with this. So
Rubio's trying to keep the door open as much as he can so that we can get in this thing the right way. Go ahead, Duke.
Yeah, this has been fascinating and very informative for me. So thank you all. Uh, is anybody hosting a meeting after the morning 2A? Because
Tomorrow, Raul show.
Yeah,
yeah,
Raul's not coming back till Wednesday, so I'll host the show.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'll supply the link. Just look for it in the chat.
Okay.
Okay. But I've been kind of just throwing up the Zoom link. I've been throwing up a Zoom link for everybody to get in on after the 2A because Raul's back on Wednesday. When Raul comes back, I'm out in terms of throwing up a link.
And
And
Okay.
I think we don't have the schedule tomorrow yet for the entire day, but unfortunately, I'm probably going to be on call with a lot of news stations
Yeah, you're gonna be
tomorrow.
busy.
So,
No,
so
you'll
it's going to
be
be like
busy.
my Friday. I have a question to everybody here though,
Yeah.
which I was talking about on my last appearance last night on News Nation, which is I talked about when I just came on here. I thought that this was very much a Trump 1.0. I didn't feel that this is a Trump 2.0 press conference. I thought this was a media event for Putin as opposed to a media event for Trump. What do you guys? This is the Trump 2.0 is not just Trump is different and the administration. Trump's coalition is different, right?
Yes.
What do you guys think is the independent voice going to be? Not the voters, but like the Rogans, the Andrew Schultzes, the Theo Vons. What is their going to be reaction to what they saw? That's
I
going
think
to be
they're
my
gonna
question. That's what I'm waiting for. I'm not waiting for Charlie Kirk and all those people
Right.
who are in the mix. But what are the independents going to think? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think they're gonna see the thing is that's why they're smart to have this thing tomorrow. It's hard for them to speak out tomorrow when he's gonna have these other people in the office because then you
But
don't
it's
want to
not-
say, oh, Trump got played, and then they come out and we got a
But those guys don't talk about policy.
Right.
Those guys talk about image and what they saw.
Yeah, so they're gonna
for
say
me,
he got
it's
played. He got played.
I'm
I
very interested
agree.
to see what
I think they're gonna
yeah,
say
yeah.
he got played.
Are there
I
other people I want to
You
bring in?
mean
Go
like
ahead,
Joe
as an
Haley.
Rogan?
independent,
Let Haley come in.
Yeah.
as a registered independent,
Mhm.
I'm obviously, like I said, you guys are so much more expert on it, but I'll take just because I watched the whole thing on Friday. I hated it. I hated every second of it. Only because I thought Andre was absolutely right that it was much more like I was watching, like a Russian state media conference. There was very little of Trump. And when there's very little of Trump, it doesn't do well in his favor. I mean, I think I said on Friday, on the evening, like I was so shocked that there was, first of all, like no questions, fine. But Trump sat there and spoke for, I think, less than like 3 minutes.
3.5 minutes was his, and Putin was double that.
Yeah.
That is not like what
That's not
anyone.
Trump.
It's not Trump, and it's not what anyone expects when like America's hosting like someone who is so is one of the biggest war criminal. Just a horrible. I expected to see way more. I don't know, like way more strains. I understand like he wasn't happy. I mean, that was clear. Something went wrong in that meeting.
Even the Hannity interview, he seemed like very not happy.
Yeah, something. Like everyone can speculate, everyone can I always say like everyone can get their own opinions and like what happened in the meeting. Nobody knows what happened in the meeting. Like nobody knows exactly the reason why it didn't go well. That it was a big, in my opinion, I think it was a big mess up. Like I really do. Like I don't see how like after how 2.5 meetings and then him going back on Air Force One and everyone returning to their respective countries, how can that be seen as a good thing? I'm waiting for the spin from like Charlie Kirk and everybody like spinning this was the greatest thing that ever happened, but to someone who really has no party and no allegiance, this was just such a mess.
That's that part of it, Haley, when you said that everybody left to go to their respective countries. Even Trump played it like that. Before he said I'm going to fly to Russia to have a meeting, like as if he's not on American territory. Okay, that's one flub. But when leaving, he's like, I'm flying back to the United States. I'm like, you're a host. You're the host.
Yeah.
You're the host. You're the guy that's running the show.
Yes. I mean that's like a Freudian slip right there.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it reveals that he didn't feel that he was the guy who was running this thing, that this was something like when he goes to the G7 or he goes somewhere else.
100%. Where he's the star.
He should be the star.
The star here.
Yeah.
The deference he gives to Putin is really unbelievable. Like
It's something
just,
I will never
it's just,
understand.
yeah, it's just a state of mind that just does not go with the history of America. You know what I
Agreed.
mean?
And I'll
It's
just say
really,
this and I'll finish. It
yeah,
just adds credence to every single one of his critics to say whatever they want
right,
about Russia because
yeah,
he is so anti speaking bad about Russia.
yeah,
And it's just something I will never understand. I will
yeah.
never get it as president.
We're gonna bring Alan in. Alan, come on in.
Good morning, everyone. Real quick on the meeting. I wasn't a huge fan. I think it was like what you said. It was a nothing burger. I mean, the good that came out of it. I mean, Melania wrote Putin a letter. I don't know if anyone's read about that.
Oh yeah. Everyone's
Abe,
laughing at her.
everybody's talking about it in Ukraine. That's the best
In
part of this.
Israel too, and they're all laughing at her.
I mean, I read some excerpts of the letter. I mean, she's a real deal first lady. I mean, she's got a lot more depth to her than just her outer beauty. She's a very poignant and intelligent woman. I thought the B2s were like a warning, a shot across the bow. That's what I took it as.
That's what they wanted to be, but he shrugged. You know, it's
Putin
Well,
laughed. He
Yeah.
smirked.
Yeah. And then the other things I've been reading is that I don't know if you heard this, Andre, that
Daddy.
Trump and Putin were talking about giving Donbass back to Russia. And I know that's a no-go for Zelensky. So, and I don't agree with that if that's going on. And then about the morning show, I on my Zoom meeting calendar, Raul doesn't have a show till September 1st now.
Oh, he
Same.
canceled everything. Okay.
They canceled it also. I'll just keep running it in the morning for you guys. I don't know how much I can
Which
participate.
which
We
link do
could
we
do it too,
which link do we
Kenny.
find?
I mean,
Which link do we find?
I'll put it in the Discord,
Oh, in the Discord. Great. So if
right? And
everybody's
I'll also
watching,
put
go
it
to
in the
Discord.
chat.
and also
and
just
I'll
so you
email
know,
everybody.
also like we could also help out. We have the evening
Yeah.
link that everybody can join. We could also,
Mm-hmm.
if you're like Kenny, like you need time, you know, you
Yeah,
don't
no,
want to do
I'll
it
just
every
throw
day.
up my link and I'll make
I'll
one of you
have to-
guys the host if I
I'll
have
have
to.
Sounds good.
disappear.
I'll have to
That's
do
all.
an opt-in email for the big list,
Yeah.
but I'll do that, and then when people get back to me in the affirmative, then I'll add them to the thing, just so everybody is in the same
Yeah,
thing.
so
So
we're all
everybody
on the
has a
same
right to
page.
say yes or no or whatever. If they miss it, that's fine. But then
'Cause we
that
had
I'll roll that up to Professor Kinney, so it'll be a wider
Yeah.
distro.
We had a split show on what was it, Friday, and then I grabbed the wrong link off Discord and we lost like 3 people coming into Kenny. So I'm sorry about that, Professor K.
And then
It's
we
okay.
all
No, you
spanked
guys
Alan.
were fine. All right, so listen, I just want to make some announcements about this show and what's going to be happening. So after Labor Day, the Sunday after Labor Day, we're going to have a new format on this show. I'm going to change it up a little bit. We're going to do a McLaughlin group style show. Okay, and I'm going to be McLaughlin. So I'm going to have fun when I go, issue 1.
So what I would do,
Trump falls down the stairs on Air Force One. You know, that kind of stuff.
Wrong.
But anyway, we're going to do a McLaughlin style group, and I think I'm going to ask Chris Simmons to be part of the group. I had preliminary discussions with him about that, but we're going to do it like rapid fire. We're going to keep going around the horn, rapid fire, and then of course all our Zoom participants will get to chime in, and that's what we're going to do. So that's going to be the new format, and we'll take it from there. And also we're going to kind of step it up a little bit, and I'll tell you what that is down the road. As far as that goes, so we are at 10:38. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make ML the host, and because I'm going to get out of here because I have a brunch to go to, and so ML will be the man, and you guys can keep chatting about this. And it was a good show. I appreciate everybody who came on, and I will talk to everybody during the week. And like I said, I'll run the morning shows until Raul comes back. So I'll get that link going and all of that stuff.
Thank
Okay.
you so much for doing that, Kenny. Thank you.
Yep, no
Thank you.
problem. And thanks, Andres, for coming on. I thought you had church today. By the way, Jackie and I want to come to your church. We want to
Please
come.
do. We have a show every Sunday, you know.
Yeah.
I'll let you guys know. I was supposed to be out of town hosting a festival, and I had to cancel on them because I have done 20 interviews since Friday
Yeah,
morning.
you're going to be busy, busy, busy,
And
my
tomorrow
friend.
I'm just going to live either in the studio or here on Zoom. So
Yeah.
thank you for bringing that up, and I'll let you know when I'm definitely coming to church.
Yeah, in our post show on Tuesday, it'll probably be a wang bang doozy one,
Oh
so
my God,
expect, right? Expect everybody to participate. Okay, so I'm out of here, guys. And
What's Tuesday?
I will see you. Yeah, Tuesday, because tomorrow is the meeting with Zelensky and the
Oh, right,
He,
right.
he said the post show on Tuesday morning because
Got
Tuesday
it.
morning.
Yeah.
Tuesday morning. Yeah.
No, I didn't
so-
know that was actually happening.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
All
I don't
right,
know.
guys.
I just literally booked myself on News Nation for 9 o'clock tomorrow, and nobody has any idea what time we're doing. So yeah,
Yeah.
so there's the meeting.
All right, guys. I'll see you.
Yep.
See ya.
So Andre,
Yeah.
can you stay here for a second?
Yeah, I'll do a couple more minutes. Yeah, I don't have to do church
So-
today, so Jesus knows where I am.
So I do think something that isn't discussed, and I've sort of really, for the last 5, 6 months, drilled into it, in my other sort of presentations I'm doing. But the new Ukrainian chief of staff, Andrei Natov,
Yeah.
is a transformative figure.
Yeah.
And I think something that's missed is that the Ukrainian way of fighting, the way of war,
Mhm.
which was, let's say, the last 3 to 3.5 years, let's say the first 3 years, is in the process of being transformed right now.
And it's fits and starts. That's the problem.
Yeah,
It won't happen overnight.
and the history of this is that's how it happens, right?
Yeah.
In World War II, when Eisenhower took over African command, it was fits and starts, and then you saw it, let's say, stumble its way through Sicily, but then by the time you get to Anzio, by the time you get to Italy, you start to really see the scale of it, and then obviously by the time you get to Normandy, you ultimately see it in Europe. So so those fits and starts, if they're in the correct direction relative to your way of war, so it's not just taking one side in this, but just in that way, and it's in a faster OTA loop and a faster cycle of decisions as your competition, as who you're competing against, then you get those benefits. And I did put a link here, which I do think is important, because he's rolled up the complete drone program to this very, I mean, probably arguably the greatest drone combat leader in history at this point, until someone proves him otherwise in war, not just in peace, and building drones. And so he has a singular objective, which is 35,000 Russian casualties a month. That's his true north, and the reorientation of Ukrainian forces to get that, applying drones, right? Applying UAV technology. So that operates independent of the, we'll call it, normal way of war that we would see, sort of the two-dimensional landscape, which is the Russians and Ukrainians hitting each other, and Russia taking, let's say, objectively another 0.1% of Ukraine every month.
Yeah.
Like, if you did the math, Russia is 0.1%
Sure.
every
But
month.
that's just going to take 500 years. Sure. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that math is likely to, let's just say, continue, but there will be a heavier cost on the Russian side now,
Yeah.
just because of that reorganization.
Yeah.
And so and he's going to do this, what you would say, sort of departmentally across the Ukrainian way of war over probably the next year or two. And that's going to have a massive impact on the fight, the actual fight, and the ability. And at the same time, and then this is something that isn't really discussed. It's discussed in Ukraine, obviously, but that Russia has figured out their mini mass mobilization campaign. They've basically figured out the economic incentive. So there's something funny going on in Russia, or you could say any state that would be in this situation.
The only thing I would add to that, Eric, is they can't figure out their mechanized vehicle shortage.
No, and they won't. So they're going to use human beings,
right?
In World War II for the same. When they ran out of T-34s, they had human T-34s, right? And no, I mean just being honest.
No, but I'm saying this is a let's say nothing happens. Let's say people talk about Trump will wave his hands and things keep going for a long time. General Zaluzhny, who's now the ambassador, who used to be the head of the army in Ukraine, he's now the ambassador.
They got rid of.
But I'm mentioning him because when somebody questioned him last month, how long does this war go? He said, "Oh, at least 2034 or whatever." Yep. So let's say we have a war till 2034. That war, like beginning today, is very different.
That's right, 100%.
Because both Ukraine and Russia had mountains of Soviet stuff to go through,
and that's almost all gone.
That's all gone. All gone. They had underground bunkers of AK-47 ammunition. Russia has lost 20,000 tanks, and a fraction of them were built in the last 10 years. All of them were old Soviet stock.
Really, in the last 30 years, 40 years.
Yeah.
I mean, and so I think something that's important to understand about this is that also, so Russia has this. It is an advantage. It's a weird advantage, but it is an advantage. As the Russian economy is flat and lined and or getting worse, and Russia's figured out we'll call it go to Vegas and put your life on 22 for the right incentive package, right? The same way as most of us here, if we get a job offer from another company and says you can start in 2 weeks. Okay, do I have a relocation package? No. It's like, all right, well, I'm not probably taking that job.
I've heard this, Aaron. I've heard this from Ukrainian POWs who their prison guards in Russia were like, "The fuck are you getting paid?"
Yeah, like that's right.
If they raise their money even close to what people are getting paid.
So they're starting to do that, and the mobilization numbers, they're blowing their numbers out, right? Like that's and the test is the spring, summer, because usually there's two mobilizations in Russia. There's a softer one in the spring, which is really college graduates and high school graduates that are just coming in, and then there's the fall one, which tends to be their larger mobilization. So as the economy is getting, let's say at least not improving to maybe worse, somewhere in that zone, then the incentives get better. That package looks better to put your life on 22 for your family. And so I do think that's running up against the Ukrainian new way of war strategy. So we're in a phase now, I think over the next 12 to 24 months, where the war, the composition of the way of war is going to be totally changed 12 to 24 months from now than what we saw in the first 3 years or so. And I don't think people are really structured around that. And that's going to mean you're going to see funkier breakouts and breakdowns, which is one of the reasons how soon does the Ukrainian fortifications get developed, because the Russians aren't stupid. They know the Ukrainians are building fortifications. So they're trying to build as much mass before the Ukrainians have the fortifications, so they can grab as much 0.1% a month of
which is why, Aaron, they are not deploying their mechanized right now. These salients that they're doing are very poorly staffed.
It's human T-34s.
Humans, they do not have the logistic support. This is why they're getting captured, because they are saving their assets for a big push, like Aaron said. And probably they would do that if a peace deal is on the table and they're like, okay, let's do a land rush with all of our whatever we have left.
Well, by the way, there is no contract, which is what a peace treaty is, or any cessation hostilities that's agreed to. There is no contract that will have any enforceable value.
No.
Unless there is minimum European forces and or international forces.
And one of those, you mentioned the fortifications. One of those being discussed is the European version of Army Corps of Engineers doing those battle lines. That's the first thing that would be brought in.
You know what? I will say this: if Trump was better briefed and could, let's say, stay focused, one ask that he could have instead of
Oh, no,
400
you're right.
asks of the Europeans would be, you know what? I'll call Putin and we're going to test this thing out. I'll call Putin. You get your European engineers ready. We're going to in the zero or low hostility lines because those
Yeah,
thousand
yeah.
miles,
That's not active. Yeah,
hundreds
yeah.
of miles that
Yeah.
have almost no hostility. I mean, if you come out, they'll shoot on both
Right.
sides. But if you don't, everyone just sitting around drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes.
There and
figuring out
Aaron,
how
there
to
are
cheat on
some
their
areas
girlfriend.
that have more Russian fortification side.
Yeah.
They're more, and there's some that are more Ukrainian.
Right.
So those are the ones that you would start with. If the Russians already are fortified, great. Let's line up the European side.
That's right. That's right. So that would be a real ask. That would be a great test of Russian commitment because they know in the end the Ukrainians are going to fortify that anyway. So you're just doing it with Europeans sooner, and you can prove the bona fides to get to some. You do that trust building. I'm not, I use that, but it's true. You do that, and then you get to the Sinai deal, right? That's how you get to the Egypt,
Right,
Israel,
right,
Sinai
yeah,
deal.
right, right. Yeah,
So
yeah.
the question is, um, does anyone see what I just said, in any practical way? And because if they don't, then you're just going to go into a permanent circle jerk, right? So
Unfortunately, I think we're still a while away, but we'll see. I don't know. There's a couple of people who raised their hands. I don't know if we want to go to them. Aaron
yeah,
or ML?
yeah,
Anybody?
please,
Yeah,
Dan,
Raleigh.
go ahead,
Yeah,
or yeah, Dan,
yeah,
we
please,
don't-
please,
Dan,
Raleigh, go ahead, and then Dan, go ahead.
Yeah. So, like, to me, with these economic problems that Russia is having, and I could be wrong, but I feel like, at least in Putin's mind, he feels like he could call peace anytime and he could rebuild back up the coffers of Russia and he could rebuild the economy because the moment he gets peace, then he can reestablish trade, at least in his mind, whether this is true or not. He could reestablish trade with everyone. He could, start rebuilding the industries. I understand what Andre's saying about how now it's really invested in military industries. So it's going to take a while to get back to civilian industries. But I think in his mind, it's like, well, we can just switch over and get back to all that. And, I can just start rebuilding my coffers in a year and get back to all that. And I think that that's kind of I mean, because, as you get older, you're for some weird reason, your time scale gets longer, even though you have less time. And, yeah, Aaron knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. But,
Can I just add an interesting
of course, Andre,
wrinkle
of
to
course.
that?
Yeah.
So yeah, the major industries in Russia are, without the military industry, there will be no jobs for people for the most part. Here's the problem. Remember what we talked about, how they're working with Iranians, we're working with China, they're working with North Koreans for all of these weapons parts. So it's not just they're building them there, but they're getting all these components. That's like getting into bed with a bunch of mobsters and then one day saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm ready to stop this business." All these things where I was paying you for chips and I was hiring your guys to make drones for me. By the way, I decided to stop that. How do you stop a business with a bunch of people that feed people to dogs? I mean, that's what you're talking about with North Korea and China. Like these are not business partners, they're mobsters. So so that's a question. That's a question of how much control does Russia have? Let's say like something happened and peace broke out and they decided we're going to stop today and we're going to try to, like you said, convert to a different kind of economy. They're in bed with the wrong people to do that, and so they might get a couple of guys leaning on their thumbs.
Okay. Okay. So I agree with you. I agree with you. And I understand the point you're making, and I think that's very valid, and that's going to complicate things if they ever do decide peace. I just wonder if Putin's fully aware of that, and if in his mind he feels like, oh, then I can't make that adjustment, or is he such an ego narcissistic? Is he so full of himself that he thinks, oh, I can make anything happen. I'm this.
I think he thinks that's the next guy's problem to figure out what happens with Russia's economy.
Yeah.
For him, it's Thelma and Louise. He's going over the cliff. He's just going to keep on pressing.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. That's all I had to say. All right.
Thank you, Raleigh. Go ahead,
You
Dan.
definitely follow it all more than me. So
I'm just trying to give you the other perspective of like, I agree with you. We can have these things about peace, but at the same time, there are other bad actors involved here, and they've made it very clear where they want this to go.
Dan
I,
can go.
I just wanted to get your guys' take. Friday we had the visuals of Trump rolling out the red carpet and all that in contrast to Reagan saying Gorbachev tear down this wall,
Right.
blah blah blah. So I'm trying to think like in the future, 5, 10 years from now, whether it's President Vance or President Newsom.
Mhm.
If God forbid we have another 9/11 or whatnot or something that happens on our soil, how do you guys think the world is going to view us at that time? Whoever is in the office, like did this do a lot of damage?
Oh, Russia, the Alaska summit.
This, and then the way he treated Zelensky in the office, and just the alienation of our allies. Like I'm just wondering, like where do you see 5, 10 years down the road, like our standing in the world?
I've mentioned this in a couple of discussions. The United States pulling back from being, they want the next Supreme Ally Commander. We just replaced them, but they want the next one to be somebody not from the United States. Like if it's Hegseth and Vance's vision, it's the America pulls back and we're not in charge of running the Supreme Ally of NATO. We're just going to keep, pulling back. And the issue there is all of us do not know, all of us on this call and everybody alive doesn't remember what it was like when America wasn't the top dog, where America couldn't call up our closest allies and say, listen, there's something weird going on. Somebody's attacking us. I want your intelligence. And they're just going to hand it over to us because we're the top dog. We've never experienced this in our lifetime in a century where America didn't have carte blanche wherever it goes. And so we are definitely going to be, if we continue going down this way, where it's not just Zelensky, it was the South African president, it was every president who comes in. And anybody who's smart really doesn't want to do a press conference like that with him in the Oval Office anymore because they're just going to get insulted. And the thing I need to keep emphasizing for people, this is not just a TV event. This is when you're talking about a head of state, you're talking about a guy who represents the entire country. And if you're insulting a guy who represents the entire country, you've just insulted that entire country. That happens when you insult an ambassador or anything like that. I know podcast culture has taken that away, and Trump doesn't attend protocol, which is how you talk to people. You have official statements that you vet and stuff like that. But in the end, that will only drive us down into our base gutter instincts of being like, hairless apes that throw poop at each other. But the major thing beyond the insulting thing is the way that we've pulled back from stuff. And we've decided not to be military allies. And if you're not a military ally, then why do I need to share my information with you? Why do I need to let your cops come into here? If you have a drug, you want to follow up with Interpol on some other stuff, maybe I'm not going to give you that permission because you're not the big tough dog anymore. And that's going to be an issue for America. And none of us know what that's like. We don't know what a world is like. All of our movies are American agents can go anywhere and do anything. That might not be the case in a future America.
Okay, thank you.
I also, I just think, to answer Dan's question, I think that just as like a simple sentence, if America stops being on the world stage, then we open the door for other people and other countries like China and Russia and the bad ones to then become the quote unquote policemen of the world or however you want to phrase it. But I just don't think that in today's world where China is such a superpower, like we can't allow that to happen. And so, of course not, let's, get involved in every single country. That's not at all what I'm advocating for, but we also cannot just stick to ourselves, like, because I think it's going to be pretty disastrous in about a decade if we start doing that.
Let me just add before Aaron jumps in, one of the things that even Republicans talk about all the time is, and Trump wants this. Like, we want to shrink the military, right? But they always talk about more Navy ships. We want a bigger Navy. We want a bigger Navy. We want a bigger Navy, and that's because the American Navy has secured the seas for every global travel, every global shipment of goods is backed by the fact that the Americans are there to prevent global piracy. We have piracy in some localized areas, but imagine if there isn't an America out there. China is not going to protect stuff. I mean, we're literally going to go back to the 19th century where, you know, you have a bunch of pirates here. That's it. That's it. So all those global trades, there's hundreds of ships that cross the Atlantic and Pacific every day. There's nothing backing that up.
So,
So go ahead, Aaron. Sorry.
so the one thing I will say is that um, it's very easy when you have an American administration, no matter what that administration is doing, pulling back from international agreements or delaying things or being bombastic, to believe there's sort of a determinism to it, right? That it's going to be that way forever. Um, the world, when we say the world, right? There's not like you go to the world, right? You go to these individual nations, and with the politics they have then. And so the test is going to be in the post-Trump world, right? The post-Trump presidency. I'm not saying Trump isn't still alive, but he's still alive, but he's not president anymore. And I think most agree that if a Republican is elected after Trump, like immediately after Trump, no matter how Trumpy they can want to be, they will not be Trump, right? They will not have his capacity. And I'm sure Alan can tell us 100 times more about that. They could try, they could mimic, they could tweak, but we saw after 2021 what a trial run of that is. And it was definitely single A and double A ball. And once in a while, someone could hit triple A ball, but that wouldn't be your starting all-star lineup. Let's put it that way. And so the issue is that whoever wins beyond Trump, Democrat, Republican, whatever, is just not going to be Trump. They might mimic things, podcast culture, whatever, but fundamentally, it's just that, right? It's their own little mimic, and that will generate a reset